Hello, I'm Andy Zopp, CAN TV's Chief Political Analyst, and it's my pleasure to guest host this week's edition of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Later in the program, I'll be joined by three very smart black men, each working in the media. We'll be discussing the media's coverage of the killing of Tyre Nichols at the hands of Memphis police officers. But first, my one-on-one with a man I hired 10 years ago, and now, well, I'm working for him. I'll explain after the break.
Change Agents places a spotlight on critical issues impacting Chicago's communities, including homelessness, gender-based violence, food inequity, bail reform, hate crimes, police reform, school bullying, the list goes on. Each week, we'll introduce you to the community organizations and leaders who are working on the front lines to address and combat these issues. Join me for Change Agents, Thursdays at 7 p.m. on CAN TV 19 and streaming live on cantv.org.
I met my first guest more than a decade ago when I hired him to join my leadership team at the Chicago Urban League. In the 10-plus years since our first meeting, I've gotten to know this quirky, talented, and fiercely loyal man rather well. So when he called me the very day he accepted a new role at CAN TV, I knew community access television in Chicago was about to change for the better. Welcome, Darius.
This is surreal. Hey, Andy. My gosh, it's great to be here.
I'm so happy to be here with you. Now, I can't believe we're just talking about this, that you've been in your role at CAN TV just shy of 11 months.
Yes.
And a lot has changed here in that time. So what's the vision underpinning the changes, and what are you trying to accomplish here and build here at CAN TV?
So I'll act like I haven't talked to you every other day over the past year. Here is what it is, and we've talked about this and part of why you're sitting here. In this inflection point, this is an incredibly important point for the city, for the country, for the world. And creating spaces where there is storytelling and real conversation and seeing each other as people, creating the space for that. And it's not just enough to say, well, everyone has a right for free speech. If there are no access points and on-ramp to platforms like this that get folks closer to the public square, it's still only free speech for a chosen select few. So really what we're working on here is what you did at Chicago Urban League, taking a beautiful organization that was more internal facing and turning us external. Because when you do that, you go, oh no, it's not enough just to be on cable, which is fantastic. You've got to have streaming, because if you are in servant leadership and you're leaning out and you are serving those who have been underserved, under-resourced, under-supported systemically, you meet them. You don't say, meet us where you can. If you have cable, get us if you don't. So that's why in the past 11 months, we are now streaming. That is why in the past 11 months, we have resurrected Chicago 2.0 and Political Forum and my show in the arena, because we understand that it is an active engagement with our audience. And we understand that if we are going to move to this inflection point, it is absolutely critical that folks are able to tell their own stories. For so long, under-resourced communities have had others tell their stories. And I won't even remember right now, but there's a story about as long as the lion's story is being told, right. Right. So that's what we're doing. So that's through training. It's really aggressive and active. And some of the things I learned, honestly, watching you. I remember our first interview. I didn't know what was happening, but I called But you were very honest, very strategic, very clear about where the organization was, where it was, and why you believed I had a purpose in it. And that's what we want to create here, really being not just programs, but the infrastructure where every Chicagoan feels like they have a voice, that they're being heard, that they see people who are their neighbors and their friends, that we're doing training, that we're being active. Because if we can get as many people under the tent as possible, we have a chance of making a choice, because we're 50-50. We're either going to begin to name things and address 400 years plus of anti-Blackness, misogyny, xenophobia, or I believe we're going to the rapture. So what we all do in this dash moment, that's what I feel like every day when I walk in here with this incredible team. What we're doing in this dash moment, we're very intentional. It is to make sure that we create opportunity that if local news is happening, it's not being told by three conglomerates who have nothing in Chicago, for our interests. So it's making sure that we have leaders like you, that we have voices, that folks learn to disagree without being agreeable again, that the art of storytelling is honored, that you look across the table at someone and you don't see an other, you see a community member and go, I may not agree with you, but you are human, so I can respect you. I can give you spirit of discernment.
One thing in particular, first of all, it's the diversity of voices that you're bringing. You have, it's the diversity of the diversity, right? Because people of color, women, we're not all the same, and you recognize that. So tell me why that's so important.
I learned very early on, I tolerate cold sores. I don't tolerate diversity. And you know this. You've been in many rooms where people who look like me don't get too often. And it shouldn't be rarefied space. It shouldn't be a gift that one person's in the room. That's too much pressure for any person. And you know this. If you put diversity of people, lived experiences around a table, you are going to get better ideas, better results. You are going to, no matter how great you think you are, we all have blind spots. And I've said to people for years, when I worked at the LGBT Center in Michigan, I said, being gay doesn't make me an expert. I have to listen and learn, and there are other voices, and it's not a monolith. Right. When we worked at Urban League and we were working on racial equity, you would tell us, being black does not make you experts. Because first, when we're doing the work we're doing supporting underserved, two things must occur, I believe. One, they deserve the excellence that has far too often been denied. So that's excellence in programming. And two, first, do no harm. So if you're not going to be bringing experts and be learned, then say nothing. Right. So that's the approach we're taking here. So when Tracy Bain is sitting here, or you're sitting here, or we have, the King Gandhi special, and I'm listening to our friends from the South Asian community, and we're having an honest conversation where we're creating a space to trust each other enough. That's how we're going to get through this. And I think all of us right now, there's no neutral. You're either going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. No one can sit on the sidelines right now.
Right. Well, it's also so important to have conversations about difficult topics, and also to recognize that we have a wide breadth of perspectives. And that's the other thing that you touched on that I'm passionate about, and that's the ability to fight with respect, as you know.
Yes.
We've had a few fights, and with respect.
Yes.
But it's so important, and we've lost that in the broader conversation, right? The world is, if you and I disagree, then you're an enemy. You're evil.
Yes.
I have to create you into something horrible.
Yeah.
And what you're doing here is one of the things you're doing here is creating a space where people can disagree respectfully. Absolutely. So again, how is that to you important to tell that story to people, that it's okay to disagree with others?
You know what? It's funny. I think about when you grew up, people would say, or going to Gandhi, be the change you want to see. So what we do here is similar to what in our friends group that we did over the pandemic. We were each other, first it was Zoom, then we were able to meet each other again in backyards. But we would have conversations like kitchen table talk, and you would disagree or agree, or I remember having a conversation once that was probably in our group where I went, I love you very much, but I could not disagree with you more. And we're just gonna have to agree to disagree on that. That is, but in that is strength and comfort, and in this inflection point, we are looking for a connection. We are looking for answers. We are looking for ourselves in each other. So knowing I grew up in the time, at my big age, I grew up in the time on community access in Detroit. My first job was at the PBS station on Detroit Black Journal, where I would watch the mayor curse out everybody in city council. But then there'd be someone I disagree with, or someone we had a very large Middle Eastern community, one of the largest outside of the Middle East. So watching shows on community access and having debate. One of the things you did, it was the prosecutor in you. One of my first weeks with you, I brought you something, you said, why? And I went, well, blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah. And you went, okay. And I said, what? You're like, well, if you can't defend your position. And I was like, oh. And I was like, oh, I love that. And that's where we are now, what we're trying to do through example. This is really what we're doing right now. How many times have we done this in a backyard or on a Zoom call and had conversation and challenged each other's thinking? Or, because I come from a time where if you believe what you believe, you want to debate it. You take it in the room and you go, if you can make me better, I want to win.
Right.
So it's not just being in echo chambers, working at Urban League. And again, I model so much after what I learned from you, which is why there's no breaking up.
Right.
We talked about this. But it was really come in prepared, be able to defend your position. And I've watched you when we sit there and we come prepared and do it, and you go, okay. Yeah. And I go, and remember one time, I'm like, we're done?
So I'm going to shut you off.
Okay.
And unfortunately, speaking of tough topics, we're about to move into my next segment where I'm going to talk to three black male journalists, about the killing of Tyre Nichols, something we also have talked about as a very difficult conversation. So I'm excited to bring them on, but this has been fabulous. Thank you for being here. And we'll be right back.
I'm Kimberly Loftus, and I own my own business. Let me help you pivot to your new career or just get that side hustle going. So I can see how you funded future businesses from your original business, but how did you fund the IT business when you started out?
I had a house, and I rented that.
You need capital to grow your business.
In the Money airs on Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CanTV 19, cantv.org, and on the all-new CanTV Plus app.
Watching the murder of Tyre Nichols play out on camera left those of us able to stomach sitting through the video stunned, angry, and beyond frustrated. But perhaps no group was more impacted by the images on the screen than black men. Now try to imagine being a black man who has to report and recount the killing of another black man at the hands of black male police officers over and over again, just because you're a journalist or a newsroom editor responsible for coverage presented to your readers or listeners or viewers. I'm joined right now by three such men: Josh McGee, investigative reporter, Mindsight News; Lee Edwards, manager, Free Spirit Media; and Eric Johnson, reporter for the Chicago Crusaders. Gentlemen, welcome to the Newsroom. Let's jump right in. So first, I just want to talk, how have you processed the Tyre Nichols murder? And how have you processed from two perspectives? Because we all have multiple perspectives, but you have two very important ones for this discussion. You're black men, you're also journalists and communicators. So talk to me a little bit about how, if in each of those personas, if it was different, how you processed what happened and what we saw. Lee, I'll go with you first.
I decided not to watch the video. I decided long ago, beginning with Laquan McDonald, not to watch videos. I understand what the videos contain, but I don't need to always see those images, not just of like black men, but black trans women, anyone, because it's too much and it needs to stop. And me seeing it doesn't actually add anything to my understanding of what took place.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a great perspective. I've actually had that conversation. Others, did you watch the video?
I think it was interesting how it played out, days and even weeks leading up to it, because we all knew that these officers were all black. We all knew that they were charged. We all knew that they were fired. So it was like you got that out of the way, sort of. Now, the video itself, the evening, it was dark. You couldn't focus on the race of the officers that much. The more focus was so much on Tyre Nichols and how that whole incident played out. And I think I can honestly say that I was absolutely stunned, how much brutality was used, in bringing this young man down. And even the fact watching him sit up against the car, with no assistant, no medical assistance whatsoever. I think by that time I wasn't really thinking about the race. And I think I speak for a lot of people that they were more thinking about this individual.
Right. I think it's a great point that I hadn't really thought about. You're so right, because it was so dark. They were just people brutalizing another person, right? How about you, Josh?
Yeah, I think the first thing as a black man, I don't think that seeing this violence or witnessing this violence at the hands of the police is something that's really out of the ordinary. It's something that we've come to see over and over again, whether we're talking about Laquan McDonald or any other incident. But I do think when you look at these videos, there's a lack of humanity. You're not really seeing people treating another human as a human. And I think that's really where the trauma kind of replays itself, where he's sitting up against the car, but he's not getting any medical attention. And eventually he ends up dying. This is 3 days later, but how much a little medical intervention could have saved this person. And I think that's part of what makes it traumatic. Is just there's a lack of people hearing and feeling this person and knowing that he needs help and that should be given to him. So I do think it's something we see over and over again, but it is kind of absurd when you see the video, whether you're getting it from Twitter or from a news organization, just how much no one's looking at this as a human.
I think on this point about the lack of humanity, I mean, it was so, and 2 points that you raised, that first one, it was so no one, right? There's all these people around, right? There's a lot of officers involved, then the paramedics come, no one is acting in a humane way towards him, which was shocking. But I think that the other point you mentioned is really, if you think about it, so you had Laquan McDonald, which was horrifying, but shockingly short, right? Comparatively, it was seconds, right? That Laquan McDonald. Then you had George Floyd, which was 9 minutes. Now you have Tyre Nichols, which is even longer, right? It's just a huge period of time. And it feels like we're getting less engaged, more. And again, I think even if you didn't see it, recognize it at the time of the video, we knew, to your point, Eric, before the video, that it was black men doing this to another black man. And it just was, for me, it was just hard to get my head around it.
As we were watching, we did not see what we were told initially, that, you know, he had some sort of traffic violation or whatever. I think that made the story even bigger, because we saw this individual being pummeled and punished for something obviously that he did not do, that he was this totally innocent black man, you know, being pummeled and being, you know, violent, you know, commit violence against them. And I think that's what made the story even bigger. It's like, you know, because we all know, you know, George Floyd, he, you know, the narrative, he had a counterfeit, you know, currency, and, you know, resisted arrest a little bit. But this individual, he did nothing. And there was no proof of it, you know, on the video.
Right. You made a point earlier, Lee, that I want to circle back to, which is you said you didn't watch the video. And I thought that was interesting. And so let's talk about the video and what do we do? How do you handle that as journalists? And think about it when you have this video that is so horrific. Do we have to see it? Is it important for the public to see it? And is it something that it's just at some point we're re-victimizing Tyre Nichols and his family by the repeated showing of it? You have a perspective, so I'll start with you.
I would prefer not to watch it, but for the public, I think it's worth watching once. Just so it's undisputed evidence that these things take place, and this is why we want police accountability to have the form of video and audio, because those officers who are saying derogatory things and aggressive, offensive things to Tyre throughout the entire process. We need to know all the details in terms of the information, as well as we can keep track of the police response, the district attorney, all the legal responses. But in terms of watching it for a play-by-play, like it's a NFL clip or things like that, that's too much for me.
It is important that this tape exists. I think that's one of the things that I go back and forth on, which is I don't know if I need to see it on Twitter or what kind of trauma we're putting on people, black men, anyone who might have any encounters with the police, by throwing it on Twitter or replaying it over and over on the news. But I do think it's important that we have this ability to bear witness to this brutality. But also, I think one of the things we think about when we talk about reforming is, if we put a body camera on here or we have more surveillance, the police aren't going to do this because they're under watch. And I think that this kind of illustrates again that that's not true. The surveillance didn't stop them from brutalizing, but it did give us this witness perspective of what they will do even when all the cameras are on them.
But I think transparency is key here. There was transparency in the George Floyd case as well as Laquan. Both cases, George Floyd and Laquan McDonald, the video evidence was key. It was key in getting both officers convicted. And I think that whenever you have police department anywhere across the country, transparency has always been an issue historically, especially in Memphis, that has a history of so many police brutality cases. If you notice that we, the public, we were told that this individual committed a traffic violation, we had to see for ourselves whether that was true, and it turned out that it was not.
Right.
You know, so once again, transparency and releasing that video and making sure the public sees it as well as journalists, it's just very important, because we need to see the real narrative. We need to see actually what happened. I think watching a video helped me see a lot that this individual did not fight back. And even though they kept hitting him, he didn't fight back. And even at one point they said, show your hands. And how could he show his hands when his hands were either handcuffed or held by another officer? So you really saw, you really get a good sense of the whole situation beyond the words, beyond what police are telling you.
Do you think that the video distracted at all from the story? And what was, when you're telling the story as journalists, what were the important messages that you wanted people to get out of the story so far? You were talking about the fact that he hadn't really committed a crime earlier, Eric. Is there any other message that you really think is important for the public to hear and learn from this story?
I think, too, the fact that this individual, despite his condition, received no medical attention whatsoever. And that there are also you saw too, other officers arriving on the scene. They did not do nothing. It was beyond just the 5 officers who committed this heinous crime, that I think the video showed us the complete story. It did not show half of the story, but, because as we saw, before the story, we were given the fact that 5 police officers were charged. We all thought perhaps maybe those were the only ones really involved. But as we saw the story unfold on the video, we saw it was just more than that. There were other issues, involving that. So I just think that the video, it really told the complete story, and it really put it out there.
Josh, how about you? As you tell the story or write about the story, what are there other aspects of it that you think are important to share and make sure that people hear?
Yeah, I think that going back to the humanity of Tyre Nichols, I think I've heard a lot of stories about him being a skateboarder, him being 29. I think I heard his father talk about him, just a joke about, you're too old to be going around with a skateboard. But I also think of how this, it describes a person who had a place here. He was working for FedEx. If you fly into Memphis, one of the first things you see is a bunch of planes, FedEx planes. This is a person who existed here. He's not an outsider. He's a human being that could find himself in this situation at any time. I think kind of thinking about the traffic incident becomes kind of this red herring where this could be a criminal caught up in a system, when really it's like a traffic stop is not a criminal offense. If he didn't turn his blinker on, if he ran a red light, that's a situation where he should still return home to his mother. But I think that we do get kind of distracted by, okay, well, there's a video coming out. It's going to come out at the end of the week. The parents say that they've watched the video. It's terrible, but you shouldn't riot in the streets after. I think that there's all these kind of play-by-plays of what could happen, when really we should be talking about why did this happen? What should happen so that this doesn't happen? But I think that, thinking about it like that takes away from, what's really important. This person should have been able to come home to their house, maybe got a ticket, maybe they could have mailed a ticket through the mail in 2 weeks and he'd have to pay for it. But what happened was a violent encounter that was just an everyday thing. It could have happened to anyone.
This was not an incident where you would expect the response of the law enforcement to be violent. So right. At best, it was a traffic. To your point, that didn't even happen. And so that violent response. But you touched on this other broader thing that I hope that media will focus on, and that is there's a real problem with law enforcement in Memphis. And their response, and also even their emergency response, right? You don't have a whole pack of people treat someone inhumanely, and there's not some underlying significant issue that they really need, hopefully will take a minute and step back and look at, because no one, right? I get, the police, that sometimes in that situation it's hard for one officer to step up, but it's not hard if you're the paramedic to go up and give him some help. It's not hard if you're an officer to have people stop punching him in the face when he's handcuffed, and I've seen officers do that. So I think that part of the story is really important. But the other thing you touched on, Josh, that I want to raise with everyone is his humanity. Have you all seen the video of him skateboarding that they put out? It's beautiful, right? Where he's just skateboarding, and it really makes him a person. How do you as journalists raise that element, right? Make sure that people realize that we're talking not just about someone, a victim, we're talking about a human being.
Well, I went to high school in a suburb, I would say east of Memphis, in Germantown, Tennessee. That area of Memphis where Tyre was murdered is South Memphis, and that's south of downtown, and that's a predominantly black community, and Memphis itself is a predominantly black city. And so the people who are assaulting him were people who were from that community, who most likely grew up there, went to college, and came back. That's sort of the energy that I want to focus on, is to highlight that this is not a situation in which we don't know who these perpetrators are. These are our neighbors, friends, brothers, fraternity brothers, whatever have you. So that's a key point to me, as well as highlighting that there are local publications that are doing the work and highlighting who Tyre Nichols was and his memory, like the Memphis Flyer. Mm-hmm. That's a really big publication there that really just highlighted, we're not going to show the video, but instead we're going to show you the photography that Tyre had. Or I believe it's MLK 50. They're a strong publication there in Memphis as well, where they highlighted what the community response was and how people honored Tyre's legacy and who he was. And I think that publication is run by a Black woman in terms of the managing editor. So just highlighting the story about the community response and the energy, the positive energy surrounding it, instead of just focusing on why he was there and who, what, where, and why in that context.
Right, absolutely. Other thoughts in terms of, so the next thing that happens often is they turn the victim into, they start telling terrible stories about him. He was had committed some kind of offense or something else. I think there's a conspiracy theory out on the internet now that there was some personal dispute between the officers and the guy. How do you as journalists nip that kind of thing in the bud?
Historically, Black men have always been criminalized in police shootings and police cases. I covered the Laquan McDonald trial. Jason Van Dyke, his team, tried to criminalize Laquan McDonald, where he was a warden of the state. He had PCP in the system. He had this, he had that. I think that's when you really have to highlight the individual, tell the whole story. What about their educational achievements? What did they do? I mean, in this case, Tyre Nichols was doing something many men, Black men, white men do, when they're young. They go skateboarding, they do this, they do that. It's easy to get so engrossed into the act itself, the incident itself, rather than take a step back and say, wait, this is not just a statistic. It's not just a typical police case. This involves a young man who had dreams just like we all had, did things that he loved to do, only 3 homes away from home. Right. Cried out to his mom, 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 mom. It wasn't, it wasn't that type of situation where here we are another Black man with a confrontation with police, this and that. Right. People tend to side with the police. In that psyche that we've seen so much, exacerbated in the media. People need to see that other side of the story.
Tell his whole story.
Right.
Well, gentlemen, we are out of time. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Eric Johnson, Josh McGee, and Lee Edwards for joining me in the newsroom this week. I look forward to welcoming each of you back in the not too distant future. And thank you for being here.
I'm Melissa Donaldson, and I like to call myself a curious boomer. Through that curiosity, I have found that when we engage with people from different generations, we are more alike than we are different. On Generation Flex, we will discuss the day's most interesting topics and discover each other's unique perspectives together. Join us Mondays at 7 p.m. on CAN TV 19, cantv.org, and on the new CAN TV Plus app.
As a former member of the Chicago Police Board, the wife of a retired member of law enforcement, and the mother of a police officer who handled police-involved shootings on more than one occasion, I can tell you that there are no easy answers here. I think conversations like the one we just had help us get there. Be sure to join us at 7 p.m. next Wednesday, March 1st, for CAN TV Live 2023 Election Analysis, where Darius and I will be joined by the host of Political Forum, Sylvia Snowden, for comprehensive analysis of the election and exclusive interviews with community leaders and some of the winning and losing candidates. Join us next week at 7 p.m. right here on CAN TV 19. Until then, be well.